Every legend leaves behind a shadow. On August 16, 1977, Elvis Presley's voice fell silent, but the questions did not. Decades later, rumours still surround the final hours of the man who changed music forever. Was it a simple tragedy, or was there something else hidden beneath the surface? Let's step beyond the headlines and into the mystery of the last days of Elvis, here on Things Visible and Invisible. Donna Presley is a first cousin of Elvis Presley, an author and a long-time storyteller of the Presley family's private history. Raised within the family circle and closely connected to Graceland, through her ongoing humanitarian work, she offers a personal perspective on Elvis's life, legacy, and the unanswered questions surrounding his final years. And she joins me down the line from where else but Memphis, Tennessee. Donna, welcome to Things Visible and Invisible.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, Sean.
Now, Donna, we are coming up to yet another anniversary of the death of Elvis Presley on 16th of August 1977. Is there really much more to be said about those sad final hours of the King of Rock and Roll?
Oh, absolutely, Sean. I mean, he's as relevant today as he ever was. I mean, he's still touching lives. He's still making a difference for the better in people's lives all over the world. And, you know, he's garnering new fans, you know, younger and younger and younger all the time. And so there's still a lot to be said about the man, of who he was and what he accomplished in such a short period of time. I mean, everyone knows the icon, the superstar, and what he accomplished as far as music and movies and everything else. But the fact of that he is so beloved all over the world and so remembered all over the world by millions and millions of people is just an absolute, I mean, what a legacy to leave not only me as a family member, but the entire world, because he was so kind and so warm and loving and giving and so generous, not only with money, but with his time and effort. And I could talk endlessly about what else he's continuing to do even in death. And it's been 49 years.
I know.
His passing.
Now, one of the things that we're going to talk about, though, is his death and some of your views on that and some of your thoughts on that. But before we do, I think we better back up a little bit, Donna, because people will know that the Presley clan, the Presley family was quite extensive. There were a lot of cousins and so forth, and Vernon and Gladys, of course. So where do you sort of come into this picture? How are you related to Elvis?
Well, my mother, Nash, and Elvis's father, Vernon, were brother and sister.
Right.
And I spent, my first memory of Elvis was around 4 years old, when he and his mom and dad came to our house in Missouri and, spent some time because he had a show that he was doing nearby. So that was my first memory. And I still, even at that young age, just seeing how charismatic he was and how just absolutely drop dead gorgeous he was, even at such a young age. And I was young myself, but he was just charismatic. You couldn't take your eyes off of him. And then from the time I was, I would go at Christmas time with my family and holidays and that sort of thing. But then when I was 10 years old, in 1960, I started going to Graceland and staying there at Graceland with our grandmother, Minnie Mae Presley, which he called Dodger. And so I would spend all my summers there. I would go approximately a week or two before school was out, and then I would stay the whole summer, and my mom and dad would come and pick me up, maybe a week before school started, and then I would go to school, and the next summer I was right back at Graceland. So I spent a great amount of time, and then when I was about 14 or 15, he called me and my mom and my dad into the dining room, because my mom and them had come to pick me up to take me home for school. And he said, "Aunt Nash, Uncle Earl, we love having Donnie," which Elvis always called me Donnie. He never called me anything but Donnie. So we love having Donnie here. It's great having her here because I'm, traveling a lot, and Grandma Dodger's here, and we just love to have her move in with us, and I'll send her to school, and I'll buy her a car, and when she graduates from high school, I'll help her get into whatever field she wants to get into. And my dad was okay with it, and I was thinking, yes, yes. And my mom went, no. And he said, but Aunt Nash, I'll take care of her. She said, honey, I know you would. But she's my little girl, and she's going home with me. So I continued to spend my summers there, but that was when I was about 15. So when I was 17 in 1967, Elvis purchased the Circle G Ranch in Walls, Mississippi. And so we moved on to the ranch there because my dad started to work for him. He oversaw the properties at Graceland and the Circle G. So we lived there, and I went to high school there and graduated from high school, at a nearby town called Horn Lake, Mississippi. So then when he sold it in 1969, we moved up to Graceland, and we lived on the property there behind the house until his passing. And, of course, I lived there till I married. But I was there every day because I lived nearby. So I was there just about every day to visit my mom and dad and my grandmother. And then in 1983, when they opened the house to the public, my mom and dad then purchased a home in Arkansas and moved there.
Right. So, I mean, that's an absolutely fascinating oversight because you in a way, you have only known Elvis, obviously your cousin, but you've known him only as this superstar from a very early age. You also were there in Graceland in the 1960s. Now, we've had other shows about Elvis where people have said that Elvis was very interested in all sorts of occult interests in the 1960s and onwards. And that, because of Hollywood, I guess, his life was all over the place. He was your cousin. He's a family member. He's part of your family. Was Graceland a happy place for Elvis in the 1960s?
Oh, yes. It was very happy for him. I mean, he loved Graceland. He loved living there. That was his home. And we as family were there. He wanted us there because we grounded him. He grew up in a very spiritual home, and my entire family grew up in the Assembly of God. My mother even became an Assembly of God minister. So he had a tremendous love and faith and belief in God. Now, he read a lot, and he was interested in a lot of things because he wanted to understand other people, why they thought the way they thought, why they felt the way they thought, because he was just interested in finding out about people. And, it's very hard to talk to people. It's very hard to maybe even change their thoughts to, what you think about, and tell people about God and how, close he was to the Lord and how he lived a Christian life as best he possibly could. Not that he was perfect. He wasn't. We all make mistakes. But, he always was very close to the Lord and always had a very strong faith and belief in God. So the fact that he read about other religions, other things, was just for pure knowledge and for his own understanding of it.
Right. Because that's one of the things, Donna, that people have said, that because I grew up with the image that Elvis was Assemblies of God, very much a typical Southern Christian, if you like, in the United States. Other people have, over the years, have tried to smash that image, tried to say, no, he wasn't really like that. He wasn't even a Christian. You were there. You're part of his family. As you say, your family is very religious. I mean, can you categorically state that Elvis was a Christian?
I can categorically state that Elvis had a very strong faith and belief in God, and he maintained that until he died.
Right. Very good.
Absolutely. Without a doubt.
So
people don't understand that he loved knowledge, and he loved reading about all sorts of different things. He loved poetry. He loved all kinds of things. So when he would read about other things, it was just for knowledge and just to be able to talk to other people that don't believe the way you do. and understand where they're coming from.
Absolutely.
Help them understand where you're coming from. But yes, he was always maintained that strong faith and belief in God, always.
Now, it's interesting what you say, Donna, because one of the things that's begun to emerge in recent years is this aspect or this side of Elvis, that he was an extremely thoughtful, extremely intelligent, extremely well-read individual. And this goes against the kind of popular image that he had in the 1960s and even into the 1970s. Was this a great source of frustration, would you say, to Elvis?
Well, of course it was. I mean, we're all human beings, and Elvis was no different. He disliked greatly hearing, erroneous things being said about him. Rumors started about him. He hated that, as any of us would. We're all human, and so we all want people to understand us as human beings. But when people would say, bad things about Elvis, it hurt him greatly. And, as you well know, the book about the Memphis Mafia that
yes.
Fred and Sonny West wrote and Dave Hebler, Elvis, What Happened? That came out shortly before his death, and he was extremely upset and hurt by it because Elvis gave so much of who he was to everybody. Every single person that was in his life benefited in so many different ways. And I don't mean just monetarily. I mean, he loved deeply. He believed in people. He gave people chances. He did everything in the world for them and tried to make everyone's life better and uplifted everyone to a life of privilege and a life that they could only dream about, or anybody could only dream about. And all he ever asked was for loyalty. And so he was greatly hurt by anybody that said anything, negative about him or put him in a bad light, especially when it wasn't true.
Now
he wasn't perfect, like I said. We all make mistakes and fall short at the glory of God. That's for sure. But he did his very best to be as warm and loving and kind and generous and respectful to all humanity.
Now, you've alluded to the book that came out shortly before he died, Elvis, What Happened, which I guess was one of the first times that the mainstream media began to sort of question what was happening at Graceland, the sort of lifestyle that Elvis was leading, or what people said the sort of lifestyle he was leading. You said that it affected Elvis. We know that. That's on public record. He was very upset by that. We also know that there was a kind of media frenzy around the book and people were very interested in it for all sorts of prurient reasons. Talk to me, though, about the events of August 16th, 1977. Where were you when Elvis died?
I was at home with my two little boys. I had a 3-year-old and an 11-month-old. And I was at home with them, and my mother called me, and she was absolutely hysterical. I could barely understand what she was saying. And finally I said, Mom, please calm down. I don't know what you're saying. And she said, pray for Elvis. And I said, what? And she said, pray for Elvis. He needs our prayers. And then she said, I've got to go. And she hung up. Well, being raised in a very strong, spiritual family and being raised to pray, because I know prayer changes things, I immediately gathered my two boys to me and we went into the living room and I knelt down on the floor and on my knees and I started praying. I didn't know what I was praying for. I just knew that Elvis needed our prayers. And so about 15 or 20 minutes later, the phone rang and I ran to answer it, and it was my mom. And she said, it's too late, baby. It's too late. And I said, what are you talking about? What do you mean? What do you mean? And because I at first thought that maybe, something happened to my grandmother. And she said, it's Elvis. And she said, he's gone. And she said, get to Graceland right away. So I asked a neighbor to watch my boys for me. And I immediately went to Graceland. And I walked in the back door, like I always did, and I walked go into my grandmother's room, and Uncle Vernon was sitting in the chair outside my grandmother's room, there was a table right beside the chair, and he was on the phone. And I went over and I knelt down in front of him, and we hugged. And I told him, Uncle Vernon, I don't understand. And I'm so sorry. And he said, I don't know what we'll do. I don't know how we'll live without Elvis. And I mean, he was just absolutely devastated, as we all were. And so the phone rang again, and I got up and went to my grandmother's room, and it was just chaos. It was like all the air had been sucked out of the room. It was hard to breathe. It was hard to function. It was hard to, I'm sorry, even to this day, this many years later, it's very difficult to talk about. But it was just a very difficult time. It's like our whole family had been swallowed up by a black hole. Your whole life, basically, you live your lives, but that nucleus in the center, your lives orbit around this, and that nucleus was gone now, and it was just chaos. It was just awful.
No,
I watched Uncle Vernon, who died, shortly, not too many months later, and because Elvis died in August of '77, and Uncle Vernon died June 26th of '79. And it was just, I watched Uncle Vernon sit there and on a daily basis, pretty much just every breath was like you thought it was going to be his last, because he was just heartbroken. He just, like he couldn't go on. It was devastating.
Now, the heartbreak that you obviously felt within the family was shared across the world by many, many millions of people. Yes. It was one of those moments where everybody of a certain age can remember where they were when they heard about Elvis's death. And it was a great global outpouring of sadness, but there was also an element of shock to it, which you've expressed beautifully as well, Donna. There was an element of shock because it was so unexpected. I mean, Elvis was only 42. Yes, he maybe had, publicly documented weight issues, but a lot of people do. I mean, it was no big deal. So there was this kind of shock that came out of nowhere, that suddenly this man who had been so much part of people's lives for many, many years was gone. Whenever the dust settled and things began to settle again at Graceland's after the funeral of Elvis, there were sort of conflicting stories of those last hours around Elvis. I'm sure you're familiar with what I'm talking about. People said they found him in the bedroom. People said they found him in the bathroom. There was all sorts of variations on that. And also Vernon was, I think, on record as maybe suggesting other things as well. What's your take on all of that?
Well, I mean, of course, it's well documented. Elvis had a lot of medical issues that he had to deal with, and took medication for those illnesses. But I started to work at Graceland for Uncle Vernon in the office in January of 1979, and he died in June of '79. But we were sitting there one day, and Uncle Vernon and I had always had a good relationship, but I was always his little niece. But when I started working for Uncle Vernon, I was an adult by that time, and I had 2 children of my own, and we started seeing each other more as, equals, because I was an adult. And so we talked every single day, because he'd come into the office, and my desk was right next to his, and we talked in depth about a lot of different things. And we became very, very close. And one day I was sitting there in the office, and he had his feet up on his desk. And in the office there was this huge picture window. And you could look out and you could see just down to where the meditation garden was. You couldn't see the whole thing, but you could at least see where it was. And he was sitting there looking at it. And like I said, every breath that he took was like, just an effort. And he said, I can't believe that my baby's laying out there in that cold ground, and the SOBs that killed him are up walking around. And I said, I know, Uncle Vernon, it's awful, it's so hard, because I was thinking, in my mind, I was thinking about, people that had hurt him and that, been disloyal to him and just different things like that. It's where my mind was going. And he said, no, you don't understand. And I said, well, what? What are you saying? And he said, I know that there was foul play involved in Elvis's death. And I was like flabbergasted. What? And he said, yes. So I said, then we need to call the police. And I reached for the phone. And he said, no, put the phone down. And I said, but Uncle Vernon, he said, just put it down. He said, I'll handle this myself, in-house, the way Elvis would want me to. He said, you remember when, and a few years before Elvis's passing, he had been, he had some death threats. And it was serious enough that the FBI became involved with the case. And he told the boys, the Memphis Mafia, because they all carried weapons, because they were security guards, and they all carried weapons for protection. And he told them, he says, if he gets me, you kill him, because I don't want some SOB walking around bragging because he killed Elvis Presley. So we all knew how Elvis felt about that. And Uncle Vernon said, I'll handle it. And I said, but Uncle Vernon, he said, I'll handle it. And he said, you keep this to yourself. You don't tell anybody. You have 2 small children. Just don't say anything to anyone. So he dropped it, and I did too at the time. Then at lunchtime, I went back to my mom's trailer behind the house, and I said, Mom, you're not going to believe what Uncle Vernon told me. And she said, what? And I told her, she said, yeah, I know. You keep it to yourself. You don't say anything. And I said, but Mom, and she said, Donna, let Vernon handle it. He'll take care of it. Just leave it alone. You have 2 small boys. If they can get to Elvis, they can get to anyone. So leave it alone. Don't say anything else. And so I didn't. And but there came a time when I felt like that it needed to be told. And so I said it. And I stand by that. And Uncle Vernon stood by that till the day he drew his last breath.
Now, there's an awful lot in what you've just said, Donna. I just want to be clear, because I think your initial reaction is the reaction of many people, which would be that there are people walking around who contributed to the downfall of Elvis, that gave him bad medicine or didn't look out for him in terms of his health or that sort of thing. That would be my natural default around that, as was yours, I think. But you're making it absolutely clear that your Uncle Vernon saw something much more sinister at the heart of Elvis's death. And then your mother's reaction is also very interesting, because, was it your mother or your grandmother you went to speak to after that?
My mother. But I'd also spoke to my grandmother later.
Because your mother's sort of very categorical statement that if they can get to Elvis, they can get to anyone, seems to imply that there are sort of these nefarious forces out there that were after him. Now, you've had many years to reflect upon this, Donna. Have you seen anything or heard anything or connected anything since that would seem to suggest that there was something in what your Uncle Vernon was saying?
Well, I absolutely believe that. I certainly do. I mean, Elvis was at the end of his life, and everybody in the family knew it. It's not just my experiences and what I witnessed myself, but my grandmother lived there. Uncle Vernon was there. My mom and dad lived on this estate, and Aunt Delta lived in the house with my grandmother and Elvis. And so these are not just things that I'm saying that I witnessed myself, although I did witness a lot myself over situations. But from talking to all the entire family, and we all knew how Uncle Vernon felt, and we all believed that. I certainly, absolutely believe that it was certainly possible, because at the end of his life, and we all knew this as well, that Elvis was planning on making some really major changes in his life. He was getting rid of a lot of the Memphis Mafia, and he was changing certain things. He was going to also change from Colonel Parker, who was his manager, his longtime manager. And so we all knew this. And there were other reasons, you know. I mean, he was going to change his life completely, and he wanted to get into really serious acting. Of course, he always loved singing, and he would have always continued to tour. But he wanted to tour Europe, and he wanted to really become a serious actor because he knew he could do it, and he certainly had the chops to be able to do it. And so these were things that he had in his life and in his mind that he was going to do and going to change and take care of and do these things. And so, I think it's absolutely, certainly possible. Without a doubt, I do. And I think that a lot of people would have been, their whole lives would have changed, you know, when he let them go. So, absolutely, I think it's possible.
Now, after Elvis died, many people for many years talked about his death from the Memphis Mafia and outside of it as well. Did any of them ever comment on what your Uncle Vernon had said or what you had heard? Was there anybody privately or publicly that said, don't talk about that, or that's not true, or anything like that?
Well, they had their own beliefs, of course, and you know, everyone has their own perspective and their own agendas. So naturally they would say, you know, well, I don't necessarily agree with that, or I think that, well, and as a matter of fact, I even spoke to Priscilla about it. And she said, well, Donna, we're not, Uncle Vernon, you know, she said, Mr. Presley was just, you know, in a bad state and he was just saying something. I said, no, Priscilla, he wasn't. He certainly believed that. I believe it. So he believed it till the day he died. And she said, well, we're going with a different narrative. And that's the way she left it. And so did several other people. They all said, oh, well, it was just a grieving, you know, just the rantings of a grieving father. But I can't imagine any grieving father having lost their child, believing it would be easier to think that somebody murdered him than to think he just died of natural causes. So, yeah, Uncle Vernon believed it until his last breath. And so, yes, I absolutely have seen and heard things that I think it's entirely possible, yes.
Now, you were an intimate in terms of the family circle. You knew Graceland. You knew the way Elvis lived, both when he was at home and when he was abroad on tour, etc. To penetrate that inner circle, if that was the case, and to take Elvis's life, would have been quite an ask, would it not?
Yeah, it would.
But you think it was possible?
But, you know, I mean, when you trust people, and when you've trusted people for years, you don't look in that, because Elvis was not a person, and we basically were not people that we look for betrayal. You know, when you trust somebody, when you've given everything that you have, and you've given your love and your trust and your loyalty to a person, you naturally think that that's going to be returned.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not, and it's very difficult. But you know, as far as naming names or anything like that, I can't. I wouldn't if I could. But you know, it's just I certainly believe it. You know, I know people think, oh, well, that's just out there. That's just, you know, a crazy thought. But trust me, it's not a crazy thought. And if Uncle Vernon believed that, who was his father, you know, saw Elvis every single day and knew every move, because Uncle Vernon was very discerning. And if he believed that, then absolutely it can happen, and it did happen, yes. I certainly believe that, I do.
No, I'm not asking you, obviously, to name names or anything akin to that, Donna, but you've had many, many decades to reflect upon this moment when Elvis died and what Uncle Vernon said to you. In your own mind, have you begun to construct, I mean, what Priscilla said, we're not going with that narrative. Have you been able to construct in your own mind a potential narrative which would have led to the murder of Elvis Presley?
Well, as I said, he was going to change his surroundings. He was going to change the people around him. I think he had unfortunately begun to realize that maybe some of the people involved in his life were not as trustworthy or as loyal as he once hoped that they were and once thought that they were. And I think he believed that there were some negative forces in his life of people around him that he needed to change. And so he was doing that. He had already made up his mind that he was doing that. And he unfortunately did not get the opportunity to do that.
Now, you were at Graceland at that time, or in and around Graceland at that time. Were you conscious of negative forces within that circle? Did you have an intimation that there were certain people that maybe Elvis shouldn't be trusting as much?
Yes, I did. I was a very quiet young child, and I was a very quiet young woman. I didn't seek attention. When I went to Graceland, I went there. I mean, I knew everybody there, but I went there to see my grandmother. When Elvis was home, of course, I spent, time around him. But you watch and you observe others, and you see what's happening in someone's life, and you see the people around them. And so I certainly felt that there were people around that didn't have Elvis's best interest at heart. It was more about them. I saw the jockeying and the vying for Elvis's attention and favor among a lot of the people that were around him. As such, the Memphis Mafia, some of them were like that. I mean, now don't get me wrong. I'm not saying they were all that way, because they weren't. There were some really wonderful guys, that were a part of Elvis's life. I mean, that did care deeply about him. But there were others that were not. And it was more all about them and what they wanted and what they had their own agendas. So, and of course I saw that. The whole family saw that. So it wasn't anything new to us that there was, negativity. And unfortunately, so many people today, even today, after so many years after his passing, are still saying negative things about him and still trying to take his dignity away. And that's why I started speaking out about, if I don't care, Sean, who you are, I don't care what relationship you had with Elvis. If you're saying negative things about him, I'm going to say something.
Yeah.
Because Elvis gave everybody that was around him, as I said, so much love, so much understanding, so much caring, and changed their lives for the better and helped them to even, elevate themselves even further after his death. And so how could you say anything negative about a man who gave you everything? I don't think, of course, Elvis wasn't perfect. None of us are, but, everything that he did for them and for, because he loved everyone. And if you say something negative and try to take his dignity away, I think that's wrong, because Elvis should be remembered for the man that he was. He should be remembered for everything that he gave to the world and is still giving to the world of love and respect and kindness. And in this world today, that's something we desperately need.
Yes, absolutely.
So I don't like the fact that they try to tear him down or make him less than what he was or who he was. But not only because of the superstar, the icon, and everything he accomplished professionally, but for the man that he was.
Yeah. And
for the life that he lived. And, he had feet of clay, but he had a heart of pure gold. And you don't find that, unfortunately, in today's world a lot of times. So we need to be bringing that back, and we need to be focusing on that. And I don't want these young fans that are coming up thinking that, they are just now joining Elvis's, the life that he lived and learning about him and loving his music. I don't want them thinking that he was, this drug addict, which has definitely been said. He was not a drug addict. Believe me, I know. I lived with a drug addict, so I know what that's like. Elvis accomplished far too much in his life and was able to do far too much to be a drug addict and still continue the life that he lived and provide and do for everyone that like he did? He had prescription medication that he took, and that was he was given by doctors for the illnesses that he had. He had glaucoma, he had a twisted colon, he had a lot of things wrong with him medically. And in the 70s, people didn't really realize what interactions that a lot of pharmaceuticals have, that they can cause one pharmaceutical can have an interaction with another one. And did Elvis over-medicate at time? Of course he did. We all do. If we have a headache and we take an aspirin, we'll think, oh, well, I'll take 2 because they'll sure knock it out. It's just one of those things. Was he dependent? Did he have a dependency as far as his prescription medication to try to make him well? Yes. But was he a drug addict? Absolutely not. And I want that cleared up, and I want his dignity to be given back to him, because so many people in his life that were very close to him have tried to take that away from him.
Yeah. Talk to me about Colonel Tom Parker. Did you have any interactions with him?
I only met Colonel Parker twice. And one of those days was the day after Elvis died. He walked into the room. We were all the family was in my grandmother's room, and we were talking about the funeral, and Uncle Vernon was trying to plan and do what needed to be done. And Colonel Parker walks in, and he's very boisterous, and he's like, we don't need to let this, things can go on, we don't need to let this, change anything. We can keep things going. And I thought that was terribly insensitive and unfeeling, because here's a man that's just lost his son, a grandmother that lost her grandson, and those of us in family who've lost a nephew or a cousin, I thought that was terribly insensitive and cold and unfeeling. And I was not impressed with him at all. Not at all.
Okay. Donna, this is my final question. And we've talked a lot about the sad circumstances of Elvis's passing and some of the mystery around that, which still persists today and no doubt will persist for some time. You mentioned Elvis had a heart of gold, and I've heard so many stories of that heart of gold over the years. I mean, they're really heartwarming stories. Could you leave us with one story that you know personally which demonstrates just how much of a heart of gold Elvis had?
Oh, yeah. I could sit here for another hour and talk about all the different memories that I have of his generosity and how he helped people and pay medical bills and buy houses and jewelry and he do it a lot of times anonymously. But my mother, as I said, was an Assembly of God minister. And so he wanted to help her with her ministry. And he goes out and he buys 4 acres of ground in Walls, Mississippi for her to put her church on. And then he helps her obtain a metal building for that church. And so then he says, she goes over to the house one night, and he said, Aunt Nash, do you have a car for your ministry? And she said, well, honey, you gave us a car last night. And he said, oh, no, that was a family car, which happened to be a Mark IV Lincoln. And he said, I want you to have one for your ministry, just for you to go around and visit, older care homes and talk to people about the Lord. So he takes her down to downtown Memphis, and he takes her to a Pontiac place. And he says, okay, Aunt Nash, pick one. And she said, no, honey, if you want me to have this car, you're going to pick it. So he takes her by the hand, and they walk around the car lot there, and he sees this Grand Prix Pontiac. It was light blue with white leather interior and a white leather Landau top. So he goes over and he opens the door, and he sets her inside the driver's side, and he kneels down beside her on the parking lot there, and he says a prayer. And then he gets up and he said, okay, Aunt Nash, this is the one. So they take the car home. Well, then another night she goes over there to see my grandmother, and Elvis was in Grandma's room, and he says, Aunt Nash, do you have a piano for your church? And she said, well, no, not yet, honey, but we're working on that. So he said, come go with me. So he picks her, he takes her by the hand, he walks her into the music room, And I'm sure everyone knows about the grand piano, the gold one that Priscilla had given him as a present, and had it gold leaf. And so he said, well, here, you can have this one. And she said, but Elvis, and he said, no, I want you to have it. So my dad, being a jack of all trades, and thinking, why pay someone else to do something that he could do? He wraps the piano in these moving blankets, and he puts it on the front end of a tractor in the bucket there. And he goes down, he goes out the gate, he turns left, drives down to Mississippi, and pulls up on the hill that my mom, where her church was. And he's looking at the church, and he looks at my mom, and he looks at the piano, and she says, well, Earl, can't you just take down a wall and put the piano in, and then, put the wall back up? And he said, well, yes, I could do that, but I don't think you'd have any place to sit because the piano's massive and your church is small. So they take it back up to Graceland, and she goes over that night. She says, honey? And he said, yes, Aunt Nash. And she said, you know that gold piano you gave me? And he said, yes. And she said, well, it won't fit in my church. Would you mind if I took it and traded it for something that will? He said, Aunt Nash, I gave you that piano. I don't care what you do with it. You can burn it if you want to. Do what you need to. And so she did. She traded it across the board, straight across the board for a spin-it piano. And now that piano, it's for many years it's set in the Country Music Hall of Fame with this story beside it.
Beautiful.
But, things like that, he did things like that all the time, and he would pay hospital bills, and he would, anonymously, because he didn't want people to know he did it. He just wanted to make sure it was taken care of. Or he'd see where in the paper where a house had burned and a family was homeless, and he'd buy them a house, things like that. And because of his generosity, I have continued that legacy with the Elvis Initiative, and I'm going around and trying to help people and places that absolutely need help. So, in my first one was in Malaysia. We went to a care home for children, and there was 20 children there that didn't have any parents, and there were 10 elderly people there that their families had just literally dropped them off. And so we took a room, and we painted a room there, and we fixed it up with shelving, and we bought TV, and we bought everything we could possibly think of that they could possibly want or need. And we bought guitars and a piano. And through my association with the Mississippi Music Foundation, we're able to provide music lessons online to these children. And we brought furniture and clothing and food. And I've also done it for a women's abuse center, and then also a halfway house where women are transitioning from going from jail and back into society. And so we've helped them, and we're just, any family or organization that really, really needs help, then we try to be there to help them to continue that legacy of generosity and giving that Elvis was so famous for.
And we'll make sure all those details are on the screen so people can see them. Donna Presley, thank you so much for coming on Things Visible and Invisible.
Thank you, Sean. It was my pleasure.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of Things Visible and Invisible. We're dedicated to uncovering phenomena that challenge our understanding of reality, from ancient enigmas and paranormal encounters to scientific anomalies and forgotten histories. If you enjoyed this journey into the mysterious and unexplained, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the notification bell to stay updated on future explorations. Have a personal experience or story that aligns with our investigations? We'd love to hear from you. Visit our website at tvi.show and reach out through our contact form. While we can't feature every submission, we review them all, and your story might be featured in an upcoming episode. To support our continued investigations, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter or channel member. Your contributions make these explorations possible and give you access to exclusive content, early releases, and monthly behind-the-scenes discussions with our team. Don't forget to check out our merch store. We've got everything from TVI branded t-shirts and hoodies to stickers and coffee mugs. perfect for showing your support while keeping the mysteries close. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time as we continue to explore the things visible and invisible.